Welcome, Rianne. In this episode, we're speaking with Ten Veen, a humanitarian aid worker and an expert in Islam and the environment. Rianne has a decade of experience at Islamic Relief Worldwide and is currently an associate lecturer at the Open University, teaching on interdisciplinary modules around the environment, ethics, and development. She also co-founded Faith and Climate Change and is a member of the management team of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences. Thank you for coming on, Rianne. It's wonderful to finally talk to you. Haji Fazl mentioned you to me, and I was quite eager to talk.
Yeah, Haji Fazlun, he's really the founder of IFES and also a lot around the Islamic environmental movement. So yeah, great honor to be on this podcast linked to IFES.
Yeah, could you start off with let's start off with just talk a bit about your background and how you got into Islam and the environment. Because it's not, at least when I was studying, it's not like a major field. It's not talked about often at all. So it'd be interesting to
It
know
was
how.
actually environmental issues that made me convert.
Okay,
The short story
fascinating.
is I grew up non-religious, actually almost evangelically atheist. That religion was really served really no purpose. But grew up internationally as the daughter of a fossil fuel man, and really saw things, for example, in Argentina, where we lived on a compound with everything you wanted to have, but right outside the compound, there was a slum on one side of the entryway and a harbor which had clearly suffered an oil disaster on the other side. You could still see the contours of animals that had perished in that accident. And I was like, there's something wrong about this. Like, obviously, I was way too young to understand things. And my parents were like, oh, when you grow up, you'll know. And then I ended up studying law, getting a big job for a global company, moved to Belgium. And it's like, now I'm supposed to know. And I still didn't know. So what I ended up doing is studying international politics. And week 2 was 9/11. So obviously quite relevant there. And the professor said, religion has always been hijacked for political purposes and all kinds of purposes. And this is what the political aims are of Al Qaeda, and this is what Islam says. So, without any intention to become religious at all, because I already had so many questions in life, like how about this, why about that? I didn't want to have a question like, is there a God or not? But I did get myself a copy of the Quran, and I was like, this is an environmentalist Bible. Look at all the chapters. They're called, the biggest one is called cow, and then one called bee. So it was really that struck me, and like obviously did a lot more research before actually converting. But it was really the integral environmental message of Islam that made me
Really?
convert. Yeah.
I saw it when you were, how old were you back then? Was this in your university days?
No, I'd finished my law degree in the Netherlands already, and then I lived in Brussels at the time. So I was in like my mid-late 20s.
Okay, and you said you recognize Islam as like an environmentalist Bible.
Yeah.
Um, what was your perspective on the environment at that time? Like, how did you see the environmental issues? And were you like a vegetarian or vegan, things like that?
I
Or
wasn't vegetarian or vegan. For me, it was more about like systemic issues. I know as a kid, I'd been a member of the kids club of WWF, but then we were asked to like, organize a party, and it's like I don't want to organize a party. I want to save the panda. So like environmental issues were clearly there from the start. Um, but at times I kind of felt lonely, like, what am I doing indeed, like this one little person trying to do things, and then like what is actually motivating me. And then when I came across Islam, it's like, well, maybe this is what is motivating me, like without me knowing it, that it was God guiding me.
okay, so effectively you knew you cared about the environment, but you probably you didn't know, you weren't sure why you cared so much. It was just a feeling, right? And then you
Yeah,
came
I
across
didn't
the
know
Quran.
why so much. I knew it was like the right thing to do. And also finding Islam was really helpful because it clarified so much that indeed it is such a relevant and urgent thing to do, to care about the environment.
And is that the only reason you converted, because of the environmental issues? Because the Quran's I mean, it's not a massive book, but it talks about lots of different things. The environment is one of them.
Yeah, well, it is the main one. Like, obviously I did double check, like, oh no, it's got this a reputation of being anti-feminist, so let me check up on that one, etc., etc. Like, I did want to make sure that I was signing up to a club I could identify myself with. But really, yeah, it was environmental issues that's really reminding me, and as probably we'll see throughout the rest of the interview, is environment for me is not just very narrow-minded a narrow interpretation of, oh, you have to be vegetarian and then things will be all right. It's very much about what kind of world do we want to live in, what kind of system do we have. For example, one of the things that appeal to me is, there's, some people can focus like, oh, there's rules, this is haram, this is this is that, but actually, what is it in service of? It is in service of a beautiful place for everyone to live that we need to strive for. So you have, like, what we need to strive for is turning into reality the maqasid, or the objectives of Sharia. And again, some people, and maybe me in a previous life, would also be like, oh no, what's this, like Sharia and those kind of, but Sharia is the way, and then maqasid is like the objectives of Sharia. And what are those? They are the protection of life, dignity, progeny, religion, and wealth. How are you supposed to do that on a dead planet? So it is really, about the system that you have, about how we organize things. And there again, links immediately to climate change, like progeny, like all future relations. Sometimes we behave in this world as if, especially also as people of faith, as if God created this for us. It's like God created it for us to benefit from, but not only us. Imagine previous generations had behaved the way we behave ourselves, the way in terms of resource use, etc. It would have been disastrous. So also, why are we behaving the way as if God has created it only for us and not for future generations? So that is really like, not narrow-minded but broad-minded. But even if people want to take a narrow-minded, I sometimes get called like, oh, a tree hugger, and it's like, I feel so blessed that you call me that, because I'm the company. Because there is a hadith where Prophet, peace be upon him, he was giving a khutbah, and there was a lady. I mean, obviously, I'm paraphrasing. There was a lady who said, "Look, shall I give you a pedestal to prepare?" And the Prophet said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And he, because previously he was doing it close to a tree, and then so the lady made him the pedestal. He did it from there, and then the tree started to cry, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, went to the tree and hugged the tree until the tree stopped crying. So it's like, if anybody calls me a tree guy, yes, I'm in.
Yeah, one of my the favorite verses in the Quran is when it talks about it says, look at the animals we've created, and their various uses for you. It says, mentions the food, the furs, and all the things we get from them. It's actually quite fascinating if you think of, like, even one cow, it can feed 500 people, and then you have its skin, which you can create leather, and you can create furs from a sheep, wool from a sheep, and so on. There's so many uses for animals. It's like they are created for us, and they're domesticated as well, which is
Actually, they're not just created for us. There is also that, or depends also how you define created for us. It's not just for our consumption. I know there's a 10th century Sufi fable around the animals' lawsuit against humanity, in the sense of there was an island where all kinds of creatures were being their fitra self, so their intrinsic self, and then there was a boat with a shipwreck with people from all shades and colors, etc. And they landed on this island, and then the humans started using the animals. And in the beginning, the animals were collaborating, like, this is a team effort. And at some point, humans went too far, and then the animals sued humanity from the king of the jinn. Because there again, we need to remember that, yes, as humans were allowed to use creation, so eat and drink what we need, but we also need to remember that creation is much more than mankind. For example, in chapter 40, verse 57. So they're not just created for our use, it's also created for themselves. So if we kill anything, we also need to clarify that then we stop enabling that animal or plant from worshiping God. So we need to really be careful, like only use what we really need in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't.
And also like chapter 6, verse 38, I like that one so much, is there's not a creature walking on the face of the earth or flying, but they are communities like you. Like sometimes as humans, we like to put ourselves so much higher. And yes, humans are the only ones who have a free will. And therefore, we got the Quran to give us guidance. Like a tree doesn't need a Quran to give it guidance. And a tree is there being a tree, and it provides shade, it provides all kinds of duties for other species. It's only humans where we have a free will, where it's only kind to get a guidance book. We can neglect the guidance book, but it is there giving us guidance, but not in the sense that we should feel arrogant and better than others.
Yeah, when I mentioned they're created for us, what I meant was it's very convenient that, let's say, sheep have wool on them. God didn't have to do that. But that the fact that we can use their skins for leather, like God did not have to do that either. But this is a blessing He's created for mankind that
But
we
not just for mankind, eh?
of course, but it's in the Quran. It says these verses where it mentions like it's in telling people, think and reflect about the world. Look how many uses there are of animals. I do not create things in vain. And
Yeah, but
there's
not
also
just
appreciation here, because if you just exhaust that resource, you've destroyed the benefit for yourselves as well. So
I
because
know, but I want to really emphasize that it's not just about sources for us. There are also like creation is also wider for us to like observe. Like we're not gonna eat a tiger, so other species were also created to make us reflect in a broader sense. For example, even for eating, is animals still have a right to a fitra or in intrinsic life. So when we're as Muslims saying, "Oh, we want a cheap chicken," is like if a chicken didn't have a life as a chicken deserves, then it is not. Then it might be halal, but isn't tayyib. Although actually Tariq Ramadan said, like you can't halalize. I'm paraphrasing, a chicken or a cow or a sheep by slaughtering it in the right way if it didn't have a decent life. And that is something where I think our arrogance sometimes comes up. It's like, oh, God created chickens for us so we can eat them. It's like, yeah, but be careful. Chickens and all the other species also have an intrinsic right of their own to have their life.
Yeah, indeed, because there's another verse in the Quran which says that God is concerned with the provision of every creature that inhabits the earth, which is interesting. So He cares about the birds getting their food, and the tigers getting their food, and the penguins getting their food, and so on. And we're not there to just suffocate every other creature for our own gain.
And sometimes we need to reflect more on that, especially living maybe in urban Western Europe. It's like, oh, but other things happen far away. Like, yeah, but our consumption is also based on like huge global economic systems which rely on, for example, Amazon, etc., being chopped down for our needs. So we need to think like, oh, I'm not doing anything to the tiger, so I don't need to think that I've got like a dead tigers on my bad deeds list. It's like, not to make it like that specific, but like we should reflect more, I believe, in the sense of like my lifestyle in a broad sense, like where do my goods come from? Did it have an impact? And the answer is most likely yes.
How do you think we can address these issues? Because right now it's very convenient for me. Let's take the example of factory farm chickens. Because they're so convenient, they're like what, £4 or £5 in the UK for an entire chicken, maybe a bit more now. Uh, But if you look at an organic chicken, let's say from like something like Willowbrook Farm, if you want like a halal organic chicken, it costs you about £17. So most people in the UK can't afford that, especially cost of living crisis. So they naturally just go and get the normal chicken from the shop, which has been factory farmed.
Well,
But
it's not normal. It's the factory
but,
farm
but,
chicken.
but it's
And I
normal.
do appreciate, like, obviously for people who've got limited funds, I don't want to give the message like, oh, you poor souls, you're not being good for the animals or etc. And that environmental care is only for people with a big wallet. Actually, oftentimes the poorest on earth have the smallest eco footprint, and it says actually in chapter 25 verse 63, it's like believers who walk gently on the earth. So it's like light eco footprint. And is yes, organic chicken might be more expensive, but who says you have to have a chicken so often? With meat in general, like I've heard it said to me so many times, it's like, yeah, but the prophet, peace be upon him, loved meat. He loved it, but that doesn't mean we should degrade it to a staple dish and have it with every meal. Prophet, peace be upon him, seldom ate meat because it was such a special element. So, who are we as ordinary Muslims to degrade something that the Prophet, peace be upon him, loved so much to a staple dish? And thus, because we want it every meal, it needs to be cheap. And you refer to being convenient. Like, is life here on this planet about convenience? This life here is only short in the broader sense of our life. It's about showing and being given the opportunity to say, like, do we deserve heaven or not? How do we behave here? What is and then what I sometimes get is like, oh, if you're not eating meat so often, are you making meat haram? It's like, no, I'm choosing to eat other of God's gifts. If you seldom eat broccoli, does that mean you've made broccoli haram? No, you've chosen not to eat broccoli. And God has given us so many things to choose from. Why should we only focus on the few ones that have such a high eco footprint? And because for our convenience and because we wish to spend less money on it, subject the chickens to such a bad life. That is really like where I have issues.
I see where you're coming from. But my thing is, in the UK where I am, people generally will not do what's, let's say, they won't think about the ethics so much. It's more about the costs and the convenience. Generally, for most people, that's how it is. So, how do you think we should address this? Because I think behavior change might take a long time, and not all people will be on board. But I think legislation might be a better way of changing the situation. So, if we can enforce standards,
The
for
thing is, especially as people of faith, why do we need man-made laws to tell us that we need to do things that are already in our holy books? Are we indeed so removed from our faith that we are more afraid of getting like a fine in this life than on day of judgment, God telling us
I
like,
would
hey,
say yes. If you look at the situation,
no,
of
I do appreciate, but like that is where I'm trying to get people to think more deeply. Like if indeed you take the current state of affairs as it is, and um, in a short term, like what can we do? Like, oh, put a fine. It's like, let's reimagine the whole way of thinking. And again, that is not for me telling in individual person in a poor side of town, and I've lived in the UK for 15 years, that, oh, it's all your fault, you should have this. Is no, let's also get the imams, etc., to think more about that. I've had chats, and then it's like they don't think about it. And for the faith community is where ordinary people get their guidance from, and that is what we need to think about.
I think in the UK, one of the challenges mainly is because the most of the Muslims are like Pakistani Muslims in the UK, and they come from a very poor background. Their grandparents and so on. So eating meat and things like that is associated with like being wealthy and so on. So there's a status symbol in some sense as well. So it's a very complicated problem. It's going to take some time, but I think younger people
Appreciate that. That
are
is
generally
like
more
cultural
aware now.
side. So obviously, like I'm not a Pakistani, and I don't know too much about the Pakistani culture, but in that sense, I think it's good. Maybe not for individuals per se, but especially for the religious leaders to clarify that difference. That yes, you know, maybe from a cultural aspect, having your geopolitical recent history, you have this preference, but actually you know, from a religious point of view, this is a better choice for you. And I was actually involved in the latter days of a project in Birmingham where indeed recent migrant communities were growing their vegetables that they missed from back home. Like now you can get everything in a supermarket or other shops, but initially people couldn't get it. And indeed they were poor. So what they did is they in the backyards instead of or front yards, instead of filling it with trash and grass and other boring stuff, they used it to grow vegetables and fruit. And that also enabled as a community to be more resilient, because if you were a day laborer and you didn't have a job for the day, at least you had food for the day because you'd grown it collectively as a community. Now, if you don't grow your own food and you maybe have a very insecure income, then if you don't have income, you're immediately in a deeper challenge. But if at least you grow your own food, and what is stopping the community from collectively doing that? Like, oh, it costs time. It's like Prophet peace be upon him had 24 hours a day, and look what he achieved. The Sahaba, the companions had 24 hours in a day. Look what they achieved. So I don't think time is an excuse. It can be a easy one in the short run, but actually, if we really reflect, it's quite an arrogant one to make. And also, if we want to spend money, it's like we had to work to earn that money. So why not cut out the middleman and grow the food directly instead of working to earn money to go to the shop to buy food, which was imported from far away?
Yeah, exactly. And also, when you grow it yourself, it's a lot fresher. It's a lot nicer as well. Um, I think a couple of years ago, me and my wife, we grew some vegetables over the summer, and it was just really fascinating getting cucumbers, tomatoes every day almost. Maybe cucumbers a few times a week, but tomatoes every day we'd get more and more tomatoes. It was really cool, actually.
Well, obviously, if you
And
live
it
in
was
a
amazing. We just thought like from this dirt, you get all this wonderful fruit. We find it really fascinating. And it actually helped us really connect with Allah as well, because you just see the verses in the Quran which says, like, it tells you to reflect, look how God's rain derives dead earth and how he brings out fruits from the earth. We thought, yeah, it's fascinating. Like if we could not do this ourselves, it's
exactly. And obviously, you know, if you live in a fifth story flat, you're not going to be self-sufficient in food. But why not, as a community, think wider? It's like maybe somebody else who's got a big garden and maybe due to physical or disability reasons can't have it. Like, why not match them up or think more as a community? Like, you know, we think more and more as individuals. We should think more
yeah. And even people who live in the apartments, they can use potted plants.
windowsill. So it's like we need to be realistic. But as you said, Hamza, it's very much also about that giving you the opportunities. Like I just sowed a seed in the ground and I gave it a bit of water, and there came a whole plant. I didn't do that. That is something that God did, and helps remind us be humble. Like, you know what? We need God in our life for this sustenance.
Yeah, because civilization is built on agriculture, and if God stops the rain, he withholds the rain, our civilization will collapse. There's actually a book which says, I think every civilization, yeah, it's called Nine Meals to Anarchy, which means if you don't have 9 meals, then you have civil strife. Society breaks down. It's fascinating because all it means is Allah withholds the rain for a few months or a year or so, and that's it. Your civilization is gone. It's vanished.
Well, and in this sense, it's also we need to remember our link again is like, what is our role here? We're guardian of creation, and some it's like, okay, so I'm Khalifa, but it's not about an honorary title. Khalifa is guardian of creation, means a job, you have to do it. Like in so many other jobs, if you don't do your job, you get sacked. In the case of the role of Khalifa or guardian of creation, you're not going to be sacked immediately in this world, but you're going to, on Day of Judgment, have to account for yourself. So instead of us as people of faith saying, okay, I've got this honorary role and I'll just behave like everybody else, like, no, try to take that job that God has given us, not some random person for some salary. No, this is a job that God gave us and will account on Day of Judgment. Like, how do we behave in that sense? And there, specifically also with rains, is rain patterns are now changing also due to climate change. And then we can reflect on chapter 30, verse 41, around corruption having arrived on the land due to what man's hand has done. So some are like, oh, how can you be of faith when there's so much rubbish happening in the world and cruelty? It's like it's us who are doing the cruelty to each other and to creation. And God is just giving us a little bit of the punishment or accountability, so that we may reflect and get back to the to the right path. So it's not that, oh, God is being cruel and giving the hazards, etc. It's actually a merciful thing. Like, are we taking it seriously? It's like, actually, we need to change our ways as individuals, but also more so as communities and the whole system in that sense.
Yeah. Let's move on from food. Let's talk about population. Because it's an increasing narrative nowadays that people are not having kids because they say, oh, we want to care for the environment, or people think, oh, this humanity is a scourge on the earth, and they have a very negative view of mankind, and so they're like, okay, we should not continue populating and so on, all that kind of stuff. What do you think about that? And do you think population is a massive issue and we should curtail our population in order to?
It's a total nonsense. Is one, again, look to chapter 2563. It's about walking gently on the earth, and collectively, the richest 1% is using the resources of so many people. So it's not the quantity of people, it's the resources people use. And especially in richer countries, it is a popular narrative like, oh, people in the poor countries, they should just stop having babies. It's like, that is such an arrogant way. Like, people in the poorest countries, if you have to live on $1 a day, what are you going to invest it in? Are you going to invest it in food to help your family survive today, or on means to maybe prevent another life 9 months down the road? So it's an extremely arrogant approach. Secondly, it's indeed like the richer ones, and even in the UK, I know there's poverty, etc., and don't wish to take light of that. But in the West, or Europe in general, our eco footprint is as if we have 3 or 4 Earths at our disposal. So it's not the quantity of people on this planet; it's the amount of resources people use, and
Yeah, it's
therefore
like the
population argument is
ultra-rich.
less a distraction and shouldn't happen. And even then, if it's about not having kids, the impact on that is only going to happen like a generation down the road. Climate issues are much more urgent than that. It's really about our consumption that we need to tackle.
Yeah, it's like, as I was saying, the ultra-rich, they have their private jets, and the amount of CO2 emissions one private jet emits is like more than like many economy flights. Even though like generally flights are very carbon intensive anyway, a normal economy flight, but a private jet flights, it's multiple times one economy flight. Uh,
Yes. So, the private jets, etc. At the same time, we shouldn't say like, oh, I'm not using private jets, so I'm fine. Like, no, if you look at Earth Overshoot Day, which means like, from when are we in the minus? It's for countries like the UK and the Netherlands where I'm based, it's April. So it means 2/3 of the year we're in the minus in terms of resource use. If you're in the minus for 2/3 of the year with your bank will close your account and say this is not a sustainable way of using a bank account. how we behaving like that with God's resources by being in the minus for 2/3 of the year. The reason we don't immediately feel it, so to speak, is because we're actually living on resources of other countries, in that sense, who have a less than one planet
And
resources.
also, yeah, going back to that verse in the Quran which says, God is concerned with the provision of all his creatures. And also he says, do not kill your babies in fear of poverty, which shows that God will provide if you keep having children. He will provide. And think about it. The population of the earth has gone from 1 billion in like 1920s to 8 billion now. And people are, there's still plenty of food. There's too much food. It's actually fascinating that population increases, but the earth, we get more and more food out of it, whether that's technologies or whatever. God continues
Well, a lot of food is also wasted. And again, I think
but
a
God is
lot of
providing for us.
focus.
It's not like God has restricted the earth. God is giving us abundance. We're wasting it ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah. We're the ones wasting it. It remains though that the topic of population is bit of like a red herring. It's like it you can discuss about it ages and ages, but actually it's our shared consumption pattern, and that we really need to also think about, that we're not the only species, and in order like the consumption we have, not just in non-edible resources like fossil fuels enabling our lifestyles, also our food, they're creatures of God. And there's a hadith I really like if you kill um I forgot the name of the bird, but it's like a teeny weeny tiny bird. If you kill such a bird unjustly, on day of judgment, it will say, so and so killed me for no reason. And that death will then be on your record. And that is like not a bird that people tend to eat, but it's by destroying their environment, by destroying their habitat, that bird will die and it'll be on our record. Like, how often do we think about that? That, oh, it's just happening on the other side of the planet. It's like, no, it's happening for our lifestyle. And now we're not seeing anything, but it's really, again, chapter 30, verse 41 about the corruption on the earth. Let us reflect on what we're actually doing, and are we ready to face that? And I think going back to what you mentioned about convenience, and maybe what you could practically do, I had some really interesting exchanges with Quakers in Birmingham, and they also had similar discussion that when people go to shops, like, oh, it's too much effort to think about which brand or which food is better for the planet. It's like, but if you've got an exam, say you've got like a school exam or whatever, you're not going to watch TV and do nothing and then hope that you'll pass on your exam, because you're going to fail your exam. What are you going to do? You're going to study, you're going to rehearse, you're going to practice, you're going to do whatever you can do to pass the exam. And then on top of that, just as a bonus, as an extra, you're going to pray that God indeed will accept your efforts and that you'll pass the exam. So similarly, like, what is our whole, like, our life on earth is not a school exam. It's a whole, like, our life's exam on what will happen after on day of judgment. So when we think like, oh, it's cost time to think about this or that, it's like a practice for a smaller exam, and you don't need to think about every item at every shopping. Like, you can take 1 week and say, should I buy this or that, or have a few easy rules. Let me buy local instead of what was flown in, and have it bit by bit, like that, in that sense, and thus strive for justice.
Indeed. And I want to touch on some of your work, and because you obviously got quite an accomplished career. What are some faith-based what are the roles people of faith can play in environmental initiatives and campaigns? How can we really use our faith to champion environmental causes? Because right now, it appears that the environment is championed by people. Well, not Muslims are at the back. They're not really at the front of it. What can we do to get at the front of it and show that our faith has a lot to offer?
Well, one, appreciate that our faith is inherently environmental. I mentioned that we cannot achieve the objectives of Islam, the objectives of Sharia, without a habitable planet. So we need to work on that, and therefore get engaged in the environmental movement and join where we have commonalities in that sense. You also mentioned about humanitarian is, and that I've worked in disaster management for quite a while, is there again need to think about how our interventions may save people now, but if it's through a destructive means, then we're actually setting people up for bigger disaster down the road. So, for example, when we distribute things, is make sure we like limit plastic as a very basic level, but also in terms of wider thinking is can we help with more sustainable development in another area? So if we want to provide food for people who are acutely at risk of hunger, is help them with other means. What I've seen, for example, in a case of Somalia with a previous famine, is that people were sending ships with food right before harvest time. So then, yes, food was needed for the people who were suffering famine at that particular time. But if you send in free food right before harvest time, you're putting the farmers at significant risk of losing their livelihood. So then you're actually creating more troubles down the road. And I'm not saying like, oh, then don't send the ships. It's more like think more holistically and broadly how you're going to prevent causing more harm than good. And it's one of the principles in Islam, like la darar, like, you know, do not do any damage in that sense. So there may be any reasons to intervene acutely, but always be careful of what the impact of that is on the longer term.
Okay, yeah, very, very apt. You know, on that point, it's interesting in the UK, Muslims, we, despite only being 5 to 10% of the population, we actually give a majority of charity. We're the richest, it's not the richest, but we are the actually we're the poorest community, but we give the most charity, which is fascinating. A lot of it actually goes to this disaster relief you're talking about, people in need and hunger. I think the key action point is actually challenging these charities and changing their initiatives to more environmental initiatives, which actually encourage the prosperity of the nations they're given to, rather than
challenging the charities, but also as donors, enable the charities to do that kind of work. I know I proposed environment policy at the charity, and it was very much like, oh, but that would make some of our work more expensive, and the donors won't accept that. So in terms of, you know, getting materials that would last longer, yes, in the initial layout is more expensive, but actually later on it's more sustainable. But it's the donors who need to enable the charities to make it happen, because charities don't have money out of nothing. They're so dependent on donors. Same as with energy setup, like if you only have a 1 week or 1 month time horizon, then maybe using fossil fuels is maybe cheaper, or like gasoline. However, that is not solving the actual problem for the people there. It is burdening people with continued expenses for fuel. When, especially in so many countries, the sun shines a lot more than in the UK and the Netherlands, so they could use solar power. But the initial setup for that is could be a little bit more expensive. So it's then also up to donors to say, hey, charity, I wish you to really do it in a more sustainable way, and I'm going to enable you, and not wanting, you know, for a cheap money help that.
And we're coming to the end of our podcast. One final thing, Rianne, can you give us some tips on what small things we can do individually to be more sustainable, be more environmental in our lives? Some things that you think
I get that question a lot, and to some extent it kind of bothers me, because if people then use it like, okay, I've done these little tidbits that Rianne has advised me to do, now I'm fine. It's like, yes, I'm happy to give some tips and things could do, but never ever, hopefully, at the expense of thinking more broadly and wider for the future in that sense. One is indeed, as I said, when you go to the shops, like, look, where have things come from? Are you having strawberries all year long because you fancy strawberries, but 3/4 of the year they don't grow, they're not in season in your country, so you have them flown in from everywhere? Think about that. Like, eat more seasonally. Also, where do you have your bank account? Even if you don't have a lot of money, your bank doesn't keep your money sitting there. It invests it in all kinds of things. Do some homework. Where does your bank invest the money in your savings account? Because that is also going to be on your record. Like, maybe you did all your prayers and behaved nicely, but do you know that your money went all against your own ethics? So do that. And
I
not
think that goes
everything
for
in 1
pensions
week.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, practically locally, if you have a garden, don't use it for grass. Actually, grass was people started having grass in their garden as a sign of, I'm so wealthy, I don't need to use my garden to grow food. It's like, but are we about ostentatiously showing off that we might be wealthy, that we can afford to have grass in our garden? It's like, why not grow food? And not that we become self-sustainable from the tiny patch in our back or front garden, but also the wider thing, the connection it puts us in with creation, and also the community ability that people who are lonely can work with other people who've got skills in that sense. So it's then helping us lower our footprint and also achieve many other community aspects. But never never solely do those bits. Also keep working on the bigger picture.
Wonderful. I just second on the investment and pensions one, because that's a major thing. People, by the time they're retired, they could have £1 million, £2 million in their pension fund pot, and that's a lot of money that's been invested in fossil fuels. So it's good to divest early. I'll try to leave some resources in the description below for that.
And check also with your bank what they mean with sustainable. I've had a case where I was on the board of a charity, and for some reason we needed to park some money for a while we reorganized some things. And a bank said, yeah, this is we wanted it in line with our green principles. And a bank said, yes, it's very sustainable. And I read it was all fossil fuels. And I said, what do you mean it's sustainable? Because it's fossil fuels. They said, yeah, your money will still exist in 6 months. It's like, yeah, but that's not my definition of sustainable. Sustainable is really, not trashing the planet. So even if you read what your bank gets up to, or your pension fund, also dig deeper in that sense and check with yourself, are you happy with a slightly lower return on investment? And most of the higher return on investment are for the moment still in fossil fuel, etc. So it's also up to us. Like, if we demand a higher return on investment, we ask the investors to put it into less sustainable things. So also, like, can we live with less return on investment? And it'll be a less return on investment in dunya, in this life. It'll be a higher return on investment in the next life.
Well, even the lower return on investment this life, the whole, like, people who want to be sustainable and green, it's not that we're not against having profits and things like that. It's about long-term vision, because we want long-term prosperity, not just short-term prosperity. So we're not sacrificing profits in this life either, in the dunya. We're actually enabling future generations to profit as well.
Which is one of the objectives of Sharia, the protection of progeny, like future generations. Can you look your grandkids in the eye, or not literally, because not everyone has grandkids or kids, but like, can you say, like, I really did a good job as a Khalifa, as a guardian of creation, God's role, in order to pass on God's creation to the next generations.
Indeed. And on that note, thank you very much, Rianne, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Hamza. And if anyone has any questions or want to follow up the conversation, I'd be happy to exchange information and have follow-on conversations.
Right.